And backing up just a little bit, we required, at first blush, we looked at it and we're like, hey, standards say you've got to install this per the 53-foot minimum roadway cross-section. And these are the reasons why, as you know, the code states that they need to improve it along their frontage. And then the standards, I mentioned that before again, so they, whether it's private or public, they got to conform. Now, we'll talk about this just a little bit more, but in that same code it states here that improvements that are not rationally related to the development do not need to complete or a fee in lieu exacted from the project, essentially. And I forgot about this point, but the keynote here is the sidewalk, not a keynote, it's a keynote, but the sidewalk is installed 5 feet inside of the northern edge of the corridor access, pushing the roadway further south and taking a little bit of real estate away. All right, so here is what the applicant, when we brought this to them, the applicant essentially gave us 2 options. The first one is, hey, let's try to see if we can keep these private, the roadway improvements within that 50-foot corridor. And then and otherwise they said, well, or we can just remove our access off of Springbok, thereby limiting Harriman City's ability to require the improvements along that frontage. At least was their discussion with the engineering department. So when we receive these types of applications, there's more than 2 things, but largely 2 things we look at. And one of them is, are we going to meet the level of service with what you propose? And then are we going to be able to meet life safety? And we essentially lean on UFA for that to make sure that they'll meet those requirements. So what we did to take a look to see if it would meet level of service, we took and tried to project what traffic we'd see along Springbok with what would be used to full build out along Springbok, and we come up around 1,000 ADT or average daily traffic, and we estimate a capacity of 5,000. So we obviously that we'd be able to meet a level of service. And so based on UFA's review, they said if they do what they've proposed with that roadway, that they would require no parking signs on one side of the road. So that would obviously be a condition that we would put in their approval if this were so moved forward with the approval.
Why does that road curb to curb? Or curb to not finished?
Oh, unfinished currently?
Yeah. So it's a 50-foot public.
It varies. Good question. Did you say asphalt?
Yeah, how much asphalt from curb to where curb would be?
It varies from 20, currently it varies from 22 to short of 26. And I'm trying to remember, and I may be off, but it's a little, it skinnies up right here a little bit. It's a little thicker here.
What's our minimum standard for the new standard?
33 feet of asphalt is on the 53-foot roadway cross section.
33 inside curb.
Good call. So it's right. Correct.
And this will be improved further, right? This is going to, there will be more asphalt when it's done.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're gonna widen what's there now.
And I'll jump to the section here and kind of show what they're proposing. The other consideration here is through this portion here, there's, we anticipate Springbok to continue to give access to that back parcel, which we anticipate 46.27 feet wide. It's kind of a random number, but that was at least on the plat. And so we've got to somehow put a roadway through there for access at some point. Whether it's a private drive or whether it's actually a road, we don't know yet. We have a pretty good idea. At least we have a current application in hand right now that shows that asphalt coming through here. So, and I'll speak to that just briefly in this presentation. Okay, so here's that consideration. So we received the application over here, which is a residential application that was brought to us. We had a DRC with them today, but we see potential.
Residential?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
area zoned residential?
So we anticipate, I guess I'm just trying to say, what we put in here and approve here could have potentially implications into this area back, that application that we're currently reviewing. Alright, so Mayor, here's your cross section. So they'll add some additional asphalt to get to 26-foot total max on their asphalt, and so they're gonna add some, the line of existing asphalt, and it varies, is just a little bit short of your curb and gutter. The planning commission, you can see here, we put a nice little red line note here with help of Jackie. The planning commission gave its recommendation with that condition, that sidewalk, because there is no proposed park strip, that they add an additional foot to the sidewalk. Now, this is again, just iterating, this is the existing half on the north side. It's got a 5-foot sidewalk, 5-foot park strip, typical curb and gutter, but then it's got this no man's land of some space at the edge of the corridor.
What's the justification of the reasoning for adding an extra foot to the sidewalk?
The thought is, it's essentially a pour right up against the curb and gutter, and they're trying to add some additional width for some buffer from pedestrian to vehicular traffic. Although minimal,
Pretty typical.
something.
6
something
foot
out
when
there.
you're abutting.
You don't want a landscape of 1 foot strip either, right?
Agreed.
And 6 feet just, makes it, it's much more comfortable to walk down.
Yeah.
That 1 foot adds a lot of.
So that is essentially what they're proposing. The options at this point are, let's kind of chat through that. We can either accept it, or we, with conditions, or we.
Can we go back to the bigger map, please?
Yep.
Yeah, keep going.
That bigger map? We're
Yeah, that one will work.
Okay.
So for me, the first issue is, I think that there does need to be a second access. I took my child to the orthodontist the other day. That's a combination orthodontist, several dentist office, and if you don't have 2 accesses, you can't get in and out of that place. So you know, when everyone's there. So for me, 2 access is pretty standard, and it's my opinion that we should have 2. The second issue then, to me, then goes down to the specifics on the road. Help me understand, if it's a private road, but it has a public easement, is that what's going on? Like, if it's a private road, how are they getting the ability to access that?
Can I take one step back and answer your question, Mayor? So that corridor easement, we'll call it, is actually not memorialized outside of that, that document. But a typical easement it grants access to those who are party to that easement. In this particular case, it would be typically this little spot right there, that teeny little triangle, that's Harriman City. Actually, then it would be this property owner, and this property owner.
Why didn't we sell off that piece when we sold off the land in the first place?
Where would the second access be for the residential? That worries me a little more.
Yeah.
For the,
About their proposal.
Comes through the orthodontist office.
It's an easement that's already in
That was
place.
all contemplated when the orthodontist office came
Yeah.
in.
Through their parking lot?
Yes.
Yes.
It's just emergency
It's just
access.
emergency.
It's
Yeah.
not.
I'm guessing there'll be below 30 units in there.
Yeah.
So they would, technically they don't.
30?
It's
Oh,
30,
there's
it's 33, and that's why the fire department wants that second access.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, as far as their specific request, I wanna see a second access. This probably will not, this may or may not come back, in my last meeting, so I'm just one opinion. But for me, I think that second access is needed. I don't necessarily, go back to, that one you were just on.
Oh, yep.
So where then would the curb go to on, the sidewalk, go back, where the close-in map? That one. So where,
Sorry, I'm just click happy here. Man. Go ahead.
you good? I can,
Yeah, go ahead.
you want
Sorry.
you want to change it one more time? So where exactly are they saying that they want the sidewalk to go to now at this point on their side?
So
That red line?
So their access off of Springbok would be here, and their sidewalk would essentially follow
Yeah.
that line right there. And it actually would have a little pedestrian egress to their front door right here off of that side.
And we will get that second access. We're also working with another dental group in between this site and the Danzy Dental.
I was gonna
Yeah.
my question back to the bigger map, if you would.
Yeah,
We just started.
when you say bigger map, you're just talking the one with the aerial
Yeah,
and.
the one that we can
okay.
see everything, the different
John?
properties.
Can you help me by chance?
Which direction are you going?
We wanna go to the air, it's gonna go to, we're gonna advance,
Same thing.
keep on going.
I didn't hear what slide you were.
Yeah, so keep on going, one more, there you go.
It's always hard for us to picture it, I know you guys have seen it a million times.
Yeah.
So are they, so the yellow part, are they orienting their buildings facing the apartments then, facing that entrance?
Their front is actually facing, their parking lot is right here, and they're fronting Anthem in that parking lot.
They do have an access off the backside too, to their building. So their main front is facing to the southeast.
And then, so this road we're talking about is the secondary access to that.
Yeah, they,
So there are two accesses.
Yeah, so
they
this-
currently do
maybe two
propose the
accesses.
two, to your point, Mayor.
So you said one of the options was get rid of one of the axes, and for me, that's a no.
Yeah.
My then concern is, are we, cause that then becomes a safe walking route. Is that going to meet sufficient, cause if we've got 30 homes in that little area and that's the only sidewalk out of that, are we meeting, is that sidewalk gonna be sufficient to meet the needs for a safe walk route?
Yeah, so, yep, I would, yes, it would. Now, I would say that, it's, the only thing right currently you would need is, it's gotta be a right of way, doesn't need to actually to be private. And then a sidewalk is actually not required, but obviously preferred.
We generally would
Yeah.
use one.
So,
More
yeah.
importantly, it'd have to be ADA, which safe walk route is another side thing, but ADA is what the sidewalk has to be, so it'd have to meet ADA.
And the safety part for me, I mean, then you have the piece in the middle. How many driveways are we gonna have right there, right next to the middle school? I mean, there's tons of walking traffic there. Is there gonna be another driveway, another access?
We're making them
for that?
share.
It'll be a
one
shared
for those
one
lots,
right off
So it
here.
only adds
Yeah.
one new additional.
So we're only gonna have
along Anthem.
the existing one for Danzy and then the one for this one, the yellow.
Yep.
The guy in the middle shares.
They share, yeah.
Okay.
For that purpose, we didn't wanna have more accesses on the Anthem.
When are we gonna add a light there, or are we going to?
It's
is,
in plan.
It,
Master plan.
yeah, it is master
Like
planned.
freedom there.
Yeah, that's a terrible one.
Yeah,
The width makes it hard to.
Yeah.
there's some pretty tough cues here, but it is, we're waiting for that warrant to show up.
I don't know, Steve, Clint, got thoughts?
Well, I agree, I want the second access, obviously, off the back, I don't wanna. I know we have to skinny that up a little bit there, but as long as those recommendations are in there that were already previously stated. And that is, one, obviously it meets our service level, and two, there's gonna have to be signage on there for no parking on one side. I'm fine with it.
Can we, signage and red curb?
Painting.
We discourage the red curb as a maintenance item, but we would prefer the signage there actually having signs along there.
I mean, in all honesty, I want the second access, I don't really have a problem, as long as there's a sidewalk all the way out to Freedom. The question is, are they putting the sidewalk in all the way to Freedom, or are they just putting it to the edge of the property?
They'll go to Freedom.
So even though that's Harriman city property, they're going to come in and put a sidewalk all the way down.
Correct. They, yes.
And ask us to reimburse.
That's,
Not
so,
reimburse.
he's exactly the point I'm going to.
It would be
is-
a requirement put on with the planning commission when they came to planning commission and say, cause they legally have to have an access from the public right away to the neighborhood. So if they put the sidewalk down through Danzy Orthodontics, there's no room to do it, but that would be another option for them, or they'd have to go up here. There's no room to do it down there, so it just defaults, it's gonna have to go up there for them to do it.
So just as long as that's clear and specified in the staff report to the planning commission, I'm not terribly.
Sorry, I was speaking about the residential subdivision, this one that he's talking about with the dental office, they would just do their part. Then out to the streets, and then the residential subdivision would have to come
Come
in
up
to do the rest down
Go
the
ahead.
part.
Just adding to what Blake's saying there, sorry Blake, I interrupted you. They have proposed a use and a maintenance agreement for this space, which is their detention facility, but they maintain it. But Harriman City would
So
continue
they tend to use it
own,
for their
Stormwater.
stormwater, but they're going to,
maintain.
why didn't we just sell it to them in the first place?
What's that?
We did a MOU for that
They
or
have to
something.
walk by it.
We've talked about a maintenance agreement so far. We could certainly do an MOU.
Well, I just,
Well, looking at that piece, I mean, we're talking about 3 feet?
Probably not that size.
I mean, versus the standard, what's, I guess I
Yeah,
missed
50
what
versus
the,
40
I'm
is
with
a-
you.
yeah.
what the actual issue is, like, how much are we talking about? Cause if it's a 3 foot difference, I'm looking at that map going, why are they even asking for this?
So
Why
in
is
some
this so
places, we
difficult?
have 22 feet of asphalt, where normally we would have 33 minus 4, 29.
maybe 28 feet actually.
So 5 feet, there's nothing built there, why is that difficult?
Yeah,
So in the standards, in the updated standards, it indicates that the engineering department cannot allow for any improvement to a roadway, whether public or private, without a deviation. And this, what they're proposing deviates from that 53-foot wide cross section.
But why must they
would-
deviate?
Yeah,
Like,
why,
what's
what's
the
the
obstacle
issue?
to compliance?
To
Just
stay
'cause they-
within, to
just
stay
'cause they
within
want
that
to?
50-foot designated right of way.
Why isn't that
It's
the
on their
road
land
section is
and
50 foot
city.
road? I'm not understanding why.
so go back
And
to
there's a
the
50-foot
full map.
right of way in there, and that's to accommodate a 50-foot road section, right?
53.
Go back to the full,
It shifts.
Yeah,
It's shifted to the
I'm gonna,
south.
John, I'm gonna go to their side.
So the- If you saw the sidewalk's not built where it was supposed to be, it's
It's
yeah.
5 feet in.
And then the next piece to the
Again, I
west
don't know why-
is fixed.
Why that's our problem
But
here.
you couldn't require this builder to go tear that out. I mean, that would not be a proportion, you would,
It would be unproportional for us to go in
yeah,
and say
'cause
you
you
have
can,
to take
you
it
can
all
require
on
them
your
to
side.
prepare their side, but you're now.
Okay, so what is our
across the-
remedy when somebody builds a sidewalk 5 feet into a public easement
It's not public,
or
It's
a
private
right of way?
it's a private.
This was before the standards were in place.
It was done when we didn't know properly. The sidewalk was. It was done
Any-
when Farm Gate was built, and so it was all one property.
Normally, yes, you tell them go move it. This is kind of weird because it's not really, they're proposing to use a private road to access. They're agreeing to fix the thing, but they can't fit a 53-foot, it's only 50, but then you have another 5 foot
5
that's been
feet.
squeezed. So if you go back to the plan, you'll see,
Literally goes to
Jonathan
the
is
door.
showing that 5 feet on the one side, that's just no man land. And that's why they're pushing the sidewalk up to the curbs, trying to
So
squeeze it.
it's 8 feet shorter.
Correct.
They're gonna take what would normally be a park strip out to accommodate for part of that 8 feet. So we end up with approximately 3 feet less asphalt. And we fix that by putting no parking on one side, is that the?
Which is what we were requiring per making sure that we don't.
Presentation, I'm sure.
We're also
I just,
taking,
there's a lot of information, I couldn't figure out what the ask was, I don't
Yeah,
have a
that's
problem with
not-
that, I'm fine.
we're also tying into what's happening to the
Next door.
west, which is fixed. So we're basically creating the same, yeah.
So is that road narrowing right there, or is it gonna be that same road width as it moves into the neighborhood? Right there.
New subdivision.
in the
They'll
subdivision?
build the
Be narrow.
full width of that.
So we're giving them a full road and then, or so they're building a full width and then going into a smaller width.
Yeah.
Where they actually, okay. And how, at its most narrow point on that road, where is its most narrow point?
Right now in the existing condition, it's right here, but this will be uniform at around this
So
point.
it's not up there at the
to
top?
there. This is a little wider, right
At
there.
that curve at the very top when they first
Yep.
come in, how, is that the same width?
They will be a full 53 feet right here at the tie-in. And then they're gonna neck it down. to get into
Where does it get
that
necked?
proposed
So-
section.
So at the very crest of that, it looks smaller.
Yeah, currently what they're proposing is not the total 53.
That's okay, so that's where my confusion, so I'm fine with that one spot being necked down and it being no parking on one side, but the rest of it should be the full width. So at the front where there's the turning and all that kind of stuff, and people like, it needs to be the full width, at the back end needs to be full width. When there's a curb where there's no parking, alright, it's a pain in the butt, but I'm fine with it. I don't, any other thoughts or is we all aligned on that? Okay, sounds like you got some.
Thank you.
Alright, we'll move on to item 2.2, traffic committee discussion and update. Bryce,
Hey,
you're
thanks.
back.
So, yeah, we wanted to give a little bit of an update from traffic committee, but also to kind of give some feedback. We had heard that we wanted to discuss kind of warrants and solutions outside of warrants. And so this presentation is just a discussion of that. We're not necessarily going for a recommendation or anything, but we wanted to discuss kind of the process and what issues we see in traffic committee the most. Okay, so as you all know, traffic committee meets monthly. It's a collection of different departments throughout the city. And so we receive resident complaints or concerns with traffic and transportation in the city. And so here's just kind of some numbers. So far in 2021, we've had about 60 complaints or concerns submitted to the traffic committee that we've discussed in traffic committee meetings. In 2019, we had about 102 issues, so we're a little bit lower than in 2019. 2020 was weird, as we know, with COVID, and so the concerns actually got very low in 2020. There weren't as many people on the road, so therefore the complaints kind of went down for that reason. And so this is just kind of give you an idea of the amount of requests that come in for each year of traffic committee. So these are the typical items that we see the most that are the concerns, the topics of concern. Speeding on our roads, crosswalks or pedestrian concerns, visibility as far as turning out of an intersection or some kind of block of the view that makes it unsafe for vehicles or pedestrians. And then a traffic signal or a stop sign request. And then also traffic flow and patterns, such as if there's a major queue somewhere, if there's not a right turn lane somewhere, we'll see those requests come in. So the first topic, speed concerns. This is typically our flow that we go through when we get a speed complaint. We like to get input from Harriman Police Department. We have members of police department on our traffic committee, so they're able to give us some input if they've already been in the area that the complaint comes up, see if they've been able to patrol the area, if it's kind of a repeated concern, or if they've been out there to enforce and it's still an issue. Then we kind of go to the next step, which is a speed study. We have portable radar counters that give us the amount of traffic, but also the speed of the traffic, which gives us some information to kind of go back to the resident and say, okay, this is where the speeds are relative to the speed limit.
And we don't use the road lines anymore, do we?
We do not use the tubes anymore. So I've seen them throughout the city, but that's not from us. So other agencies may be counting on our roads, which
Those are
happens,
typically development.
Yeah,
When we ask for a traffic
development.
study, they'll go out and put them into.
Or
county, do the
even
traffic
like
study.
a Wasatch Front study that they're trying to kind of get traffic counts on our roads. But yeah, we've kind of gone away from the tubes. The radar counters are much more accurate, and they also are a little less obvious to drivers,
So
right?
less obvious of somebody doing circles trying to increase the
Exactly, yeah. So they just can attach on any street light or street sign pole, and they're not very obvious to the driver, so you don't have as much manipulation of the data. And so a lot of the speed concerns are on residential roads because residents are concerned about their children, their pets kind of being in the area of fast moving vehicles. They have driveways that come out, and so this is a very common complaint. So we needed some way to kind of categorize the complaints and to see where they come in at compared to others, right? Some roads may be an issue, some others may not be an issue, and without a speed study, it's really hard to tell kind of where that data comes in. And so the speed study kind of gets us to that bottom point that we recommend improvements to a roadway if the 85th percentile speed, and the 85th percentile speed, to explain that real quick, is if we drop the 15% slowest speeds. And this is often because you have vehicles pulling in and out of a driveway and whatnot that may lower the average speed. That's not a real reflection of kind of the traffic data. So if that speed is over 7 miles an hour over the posted speed limit, then we recommend some kind of improvement, and that's what these solutions are. So awareness campaigns, driver feedback signs, those are the ones that flash your speed if you're going over the speed limit. Increased enforcement, bulb outs, choke points, that's actually changing the roadway to kind of feel a little bit tighter and slow people down. Improved signing and striping, so maybe there's no speed limit sign on the road and people have just been blowing through, not even thinking about it. Maybe install a speed limit sign to make people actually think, hey, what's the speed limit on this road? Mini roundabouts, we've never installed one of these, but this is a kind of a newer thing that cities are beginning to do in their intersections to slow people down without kind of bringing people to a complete stop. So those are kind of the solutions. So far, we've really relied heavily on HPD for a little bit of input, but also increased enforcement in areas that we see issues. But we've also installed several feedback signs throughout the city. And we want to rotate those more often than they've been rotated because after a certain amount of time, they lose their effectiveness. People are used to seeing that they're over the speed limit and they stop paying attention to it. So one of our goals is to rotate those a little bit more often throughout the city. So crosswalk concerns, this is another big one that we get in the traffic committee, is that pedestrians feel unsafe in a crosswalk or that there is no existing crosswalk, so they're asking for a new crosswalk to be installed. And so this is a really big form. I don't expect it to take that all in, but essentially it gives us an idea on what applications meet which type of roadways. So like if you're in a 4-lane, 5-lane road, your treatments for a crosswalk might be more intensive than if you're just on a residential road that doesn't have as much traffic, speed's lower. The width to cross is a lot smaller than on these bigger roads. So this is what we've kind of started to look at is create, it's not necessarily a warrant like we have for our traffic signals, but it's a similar idea that, okay, let's look at the data, see what makes sense here so that we're using the right installation, the right enhancements for a crosswalk in the right locations. And so there's kind of a little step-by-step guide, and this helps us to not only give the right recommendations, but also to have equitable treatment throughout the city. It also enables us, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, to reason why, say, a flashing light system, an RRFB system, makes sense in one place, but not another. This kind of helps us explain that. And then for adding new crosswalks, we kind of look at this as well, but it really comes down to, is there a demand for it? And how close is the location they're asking for to an existing crosswalk? Is it out of the way, or could they use the existing crosswalk? So here's some possible treatments for crosswalks. The RRFB systems at the bottom here, the rapid flashing lights. So we just have that in front of Silvercrest here on Main Street. And actually now at the dog park, there's a system there. There's also putting up more signs, which can be effective, but can also be ineffective. If we put up too many signs, it can be confusing for drivers. And then also we've used a hawk signal in the past, so those are traffic signals for pedestrians only. So in front of the middle school on Anthem, and we just installed one on Sentinel Ridge Boulevard in between Ridgeview Elementary and Mountain Ridge High School. We are considering other options that maybe we don't warrant those signals, because those are expensive and are difficult to come up with, right? And may be best applied for larger roads like Main Street or Sentinel Ridge or near schools where we have a lot of pedestrian use, right? But on these smaller crosswalks that may not have as much use, kind of what options do we have? So we're exploring some of these options that are kind of outside of that realm. So there's painted crosswalks. If you've been on Provo Center Street, they do this. They paint it like brick so that it pops to the eye when you're driving and you know to pay attention for pedestrians. We do, Public Works has given us some feedback that they are a little concerned that snowplow season may remove these painted crosswalks. That one's actually in Las Vegas, so it looks great, but they don't have to deal with the plowing that we do. But we're exploring the options. There's kind of some new materials that they're putting down that's plow resistant, and so that's something we want to look into. These in-road bollard signs could be an option, so they're flexible. So if a vehicle hits them, it doesn't damage the vehicle, well, hopefully it doesn't damage the vehicle. But they bring attention to the crosswalk, and they generally are put right on the edge. You can kind of see the middle median there to slow people down. So that's a new option that we're looking into. And then pedestrian islands, we're kind of upping the cost as we go up here. So pedestrian islands are an option that slow people down, but they also give a refuge for those that, if it's a wide road. Any questions on anything so far? Visibility, this one is a common one. So this is on Fort Harriman Parkway. You've probably seen the construction going on. Our Parks Department's helping us out right now to lower that median. Let's see if I can get that laser pointer. So we had a lot of complaints from people living in this area trying to turn out of this neighborhood that they could not see the cars coming here. And so we went out and looked at it, and they were right. That median was up about 4-5 feet from the roadway. So if it was a large vehicle, you could see it over the median, but if it was a smaller car.
So when you're doing construction, you're standing up like a normal person, you can see over it, but when you're sitting down in your small car, you can't.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's one of the things we looked at. So those triangles are kind of the sight distance that we need at an intersection to consider it safe. And the size of them depend on the speed of the road that you're turning onto, right? Because the oncoming traffic's coming faster on a 35-mile-an-hour road than on a residential 25-mile-an-hour road. So the size of them go based on the speed limit of the road. And so our treatments that we've done so far, and really I don't know that there's much outside of this, is no parking signs. So part of it is just vehicles parked right up to intersections and block view. Trim and lower trees, remove trees if they're a major issue, and then like we're doing here, lower medians. And so those are the solutions we kind of jump to for visibility. And the most common one are that vehicles are parking too close to the intersection, so we have to put up no parking signs, and we've seen examples of those in council meetings before. So traffic signal and stop sign requests, not quite as common as the other ones, but we do get these requests as well. Generally, so traffic signals do have a nationally recognized warrant. It's in the MUTCD, which is a national governing book for all traffic devices. And so there are different warrants. It's not just one warrant. There's different ways to warrant a traffic signal. The most common one is delay on a minor road to turn left. And that kind of links to the second one of safety issues, that vehicles start jumping in front of traffic when they shouldn't because they've waited for so long. It becomes a safety issue for those vehicles trying to get out on the road. So that's one of the reasons the traffic signal's warranted. Just safety issues in general, if there's crashes at an intersection, they can be helpful in certain cases to increase safety. Pedestrian as well, as we've talked about, at signals, they're usually safer than a mid-block crossing with no traffic control. And then also for optimization within a network, if we're trying to get traffic flow all through a road and all connected, sometimes a signal makes sense to install to make that traffic flow all work together. So we don't see that as much here, but in Provo-Orem area on University Parkway, they have a ton of traffic signals, which isn't usually recommended, but they have a bus rapid transit line that is actually hooked up to the signals, and so it optimizes that transit line all the way through University Parkway. And so that's another warrant that can give us reason to install a traffic signal. And kind of taking a step down from that, stop signs, usually it's a request for a four-way stop that's currently a two-way stop. So the purpose behind stop signs are to assign right-of-way, major, minor roads. And those are usually based on traffic volumes or road classification. But we will install a four-way stop for, again, safety concerns, crashes that we're seeing that can be mitigated by a four-way stop. In general, we don't like to install four-way stops if we don't have to. And then pedestrian safety concerns, again, might be another reason to install a stop sign. One of the biggest questions we get is, can we install a four-way stop to slow people down? And the answer is no. We cannot install a four-way stop to slow people down. And that's based on a lot of studies in the past, and it's in the MUTCD as well, so it's kind of in the same category of national recommendations, that if you install a stop sign just to slow people down that's not warranted, people tend to blow through those stop signs more often, and then pedestrians crossing are actually more unsafe because they're counting on the people to stop at the stop sign, but they don't. And then on top of that, people tend to speed up more past that stop sign because they had to slow down than if they never had the stop sign to begin with. So there are reasons why we try to limit the amount of four-way stops in the city. But yeah, any questions or thoughts on that? And then the last one, so why do we have these warrants? And we've kind of gone through these a little bit, but safety. So these warrants have been nationally recommended for when they're most useful, when they're most safe to install, such as traffic signals and stop signs. If we install those outside of warrants, they can create a more unsafe environment than without them, like I was talking about with the stop signs. Or if we're installing a traffic signal that shouldn't be installed, sometimes you see an increase in rear view or in rear end accidents because of the traffic signal. Liability, going outside of warrants, while it is possible, it does allow for more opportunity of litigation, that we're going outside of national recommendations. And again, if something goes wrong outside of that, we are a little bit more open to that risk of litigation. And then lastly, the responsible use of funds. We can't install an RRFB system on every crosswalk, right? And so this gives us a good idea on when they should be applied, but it also gives us equitable treatment throughout the entire city. So if we get a request and we say, no, we can't install it here, and then another place we say we can, even though they're the same road, then there becomes questions on how we're using the funds. And also just from a cost-effective standpoint, like I said, we can't install everything everywhere. And so this ensures that we kind of are using the funds correctly. And so I think that's all I've got. Any questions based on that?
One of the reasons we brought this back, there was a question about, can we expand beyond warrants? And warrants have a whole list of things, and so Bryce had in there those sections on crosswalks. That's where we're seeing it. Most people will see, you need to put up a light, this isn't safe, and when they mean a traffic light, you need to do something. So maybe if we could just hear from council your thoughts on going out. Bryce did a good job on, as he had that one page, trying to create some standards to when we would use these. Goes back that, this gives us some structure around it. But these aren't warrants, they're not gonna be in the book, but we're just trying to come up, if we expand the possible solutions we might use, how do we do it? And so if you go back to the pictures, I'm just curious council's thoughts on that. Some of these have some fairly large dollars to them, those Hawk systems. We tried to put them kind of in order. I think the Hawk system is probably your most expensive.
Yes.
Then what's that up to now?
So
The one in front of
yeah,
the middle school, Copper Mountain is like 95,000.
yeah, it's about 130,000 now.
Still went up.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of those things, at least I get asked all those same questions, right? Save this one for the end, speed bumps. It's always a fun one. But the lights, they think that that's some easy thing that we can just go put in. No, that costs $130,000. That's a huge chunk.
If it has power.
Is it? Well, yeah. And then you get isn't it worth it to protect the children? Well, we have this whole process to go through, and yeah, if it's warranted, then absolutely it's worth it. But no, we can't put those everywhere.
The
exactly. And so this kind of gives us a little bit of a idea to say that and to guide. And I think maybe, I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on this, but maybe publishing some information through communications and whatnot to say, this is when things are appropriate and not, because that's often the times that we get concerns, or that someone wants a stop sign, but it's not the right application for a stop sign, and maybe we could kind of have a information sheet that kind of helps us with that, and then that way we can kind of answer those questions easier through this information sheet or something.
So as far as different options, Steve says it best where, I think we've shown that we're a community that's willing to try different and novel approaches. And you've said that recently, once or twice. And so, I'm fine with it, and I think that moving through a tier system or trying to find, like, we don't want, and I've said it 100 times, right, like, public safety is our number one priority as a council, at least in my opinion, it should always be our number one priority is public safety. And obviously, the things we're talking about are exactly that. Is saying that we have to make a decision on whether or not your particular street is, gets a safety device versus somebody else seem callous. It can, but there's Jared's exactly right. We can't put $100,000 system in front of every.
Well, and I like the process that we have, right? Being on the committee prior, I think it's something that's evolving all the time, and we're adjusting and changing as we can. But the framework is there, and I think everybody's doing a great job of working with it.
I think one of the things that might be helpful that you kind of touched on is communication to our residents about what are things that could be appropriate, right? Everybody wants a stop sign or a speed limit sign, right? Maybe just saying, hey, the first thing you should probably do if you think there's a bunch of speeding in your neighborhood is file a traffic report with the police department. Because how many times have they filed those traffic reports, you guys have gone out there and sat for 2 or 3 or 4 hours during the times that they designate, and the problem's not actually there.
And Mayor, I'm just gonna add to that they can contact HPD or engineering@harriman.org, right? And we filled those and we include those in the agenda to discuss.
But I mean, by going through that process, I'm open to these novel approaches, these new ideas, as long as we go through this process. And if we continue to warrant, for lack of a better term, but to justify probably is a better idea. As a city, that there's an additional step to be taken. I mean, I've heard Chief tell us before he's walked down the street and see people going 65 miles an hour on 35.
Well, there's always, there's never a perfect solution for everyone, right? Because it's all subject to human error. So,
But I think
yeah,
we're setting up a
doing
pretty
this.
good, robust process. But as a or at least as a single council member for the next month and a half, I'm open to those other approaches if it, especially if a resident comes to us with something novel and fairly inexpensive, they come to us and say, hey, I think this could work, and it's something that has been tried and tested in other places, I'm willing to give it a shot.
I think a lot of times where it's been difficult is maybe the line between safety and convenience is blurred, right?
Yeah.
It'd be more convenient for them if it were here. Everybody from my side of the street would prefer it here, but that doesn't take into account the other side of the street and the people down there, et cetera. So I really like the process we have and the number of people in different disciplines that are part of this committee to go through that.
So there is a data point in all of this analysis that's missing, and that is near misses.
Yeah.
That's something that is hard to quantify. It's not impossible, but it would take a different observational study to try and quantify that and determine how often and how serious that is. A lack of actual accidents or car pedestrian things doesn't necessarily mean that that is not a dangerous area, right, or a dangerous intersection, right? And that is where I think the public finds a substantial disconnect between the process that we have and the results that they're seeing. Is, at least anecdotally, it gets reported that there are numerous, frequent, repeated near misses between children and cars, especially
Around schools.
Right.
Around schools, entry, exit, and, start and release times. You know, people slamming on brakes, kids being stupid, weather, the sun's in your eyes. I mean, there's a million things, right? But there's a lot of close calls, and parents get frustrated about it. They've expressed that frustration, that concern to me. And so they have gone through the process, reported something, it comes through thing, we go to the study and go, yeah, nothing we can do. That is where my question lies, is when the problem remains and our system has not provided a solution, and our process isn't effective yet. It's not fully effective. I mean, I appreciate that there's a standardized system and there's a list of, you know, nationally accepted engineering standards, and I think that those are, you know, appropriate for us to be adopting. I think especially the things about uniform application, right, and cost justification, right? But again, there is this point of what happens when the issues are still remaining and substantial, at least anecdotally, and the process that we have has not remedied that. That's where my question is, what other options do we have? How do we go, is there an amendment to this process? Is there an appeal to this process? Is there something else that we can?
That's what we're
So
doing
that's
here.
what I think what we're trying to add, so what you've been dealing with, a lot of these boxes didn't exist before.
Right,
We haven't considered in-road bollards as far as I'm aware until,
right, and refuge
Till we
things,
started-
right, so.
so if you go and put something in when the warrant doesn't, even though there's near misses, the liability to the city is shifted all to the city, right? Cause that first driver who gets rear-ended, it's the city's liability.
Because we put in
because we didn't follow an accepted standard, it hits us. They talked about that on Monday, usually, of the trust.
The trust.
If you go outside of the standard, you take the liability. So that's why engineers always look at it, and that's that
But here's
phrase
the
of warrants.
problem, is if we follow the standards, there's no liability, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's safe.
Correct.
That's the issue.
So we have to come up with different ways, because we can't use those standards. We can't put a stoplight in if the warrant doesn't exist. You'll
Understand.
actually cause more damage than the one or two near misses you'll.
And again, that's not what I'm trying to say, is how do we make exceptions to the standards, is how do we amend those?
So-
How do we find solutions that,
So that's what we're trying to propose, is things here that are not, these ones.
Part of it is we can't see what we're looking at here
Yeah.
because this is too
I don't know
small.
if we had a
Yeah.
way
We have
to
a bigger
blow
version
that
so that
up.
we can.
Yeah, so that, yeah, it's,
Or zoom in
I don't
on
know. I don't know,
If-
John, if,
I can,
So what we've done here, while we're trying to give us some uniformity to it, these are not MUTCD standards, right? There's nothing in here. A traffic light has a warrant. You have to follow that as a city, right? No matter how much people complain, you really have to follow that warrant. These, we're saying, let's step back away from painted sidewalk, traffic light. There has to be something in between, or a hawk signal at $130,000 in this. So that's what we're proposing are some alternatives.
This is the gray area where we can go for those things.
Exactly.
for example, what about like the, you know, the RFB signals, right? That, and again, I have some specific instances in mind, but just in traffic committee, we've seen a lot of things where it's like, it's really gray, right? It gets to a point where it's
Well, and there
just
may
not
be,
quite conclusive.
what does an RFR, a rapid flashing beacon cost now?
so it's about 20,000 for a second.
Most of that cost is bringing the power to it.
So you start walking down and say, so on this one, the first one is, okay, is there should we put enhanced signs? Maybe we just haven't put signs. And then I think, is that also the one where you talk about changing the paint, the actual painting, there's certain things we're saying, okay, well, maybe we'd try this, or we'd go to the road.
Marking a crosswalk.
Yeah, a bollard mounted one in the middle, it's in the middle of the street, right? It's right on that side. Gunnison, Colorado, if you've ever driven through Gunnison, Colorado, state highway, you're going along and all of a sudden there's a line of these stop for pedestrians ahead. And it just catches your attention because if you're not paying it and you hit it, the state doesn't reimburse you for damaging the car, they charge you for damaging their sign. Cause it's especially if you have a standard as to why it's there, so there's some options that, and I appreciate Bryce really looking at this. Is there something between big, expensive, and just saying there's nothing we can do? Are there some options we can start looking at? The most expensive, it gets more expensive as you go down the list. I think there are some new, pedestrian island type things. We talked about this. They're actually, some of them are, they're preformed, you set them down, they're epoxied or bolted down, and they're just a spot. Again, you put that same bollard on it, it's another item in the road, it kind of slows people down because it's there, but it gives the pedestrian a safer place to be if especially when you're trying to cross a really wide road. We looked specifically, and there were two intersections two crosswalks we've been looking at, and I don't think we have those up there, but we could talk a little bit. Looking at those are specifically what started going, are there some options we could do that would slow cars
Steve,
down?
your point is well taken though. So, just to give an example, because I know exactly what you're talking about. Literally 2 days ago, I was picking up my children from school and pulling out of the parking lot, a young driver T-boned a minivan that was driving by right in front of Harriman Elementary School. Right in front of me, watched the whole thing happen. Low speed, so everyone was fine, but both cars couldn't drive off, right? And now, right in front of the school, right before school's out, we now have we have an accident with two cars in the way that it's a big deal.
1,000 kids' parents are seeing, hey, this isn't safe.
This isn't safe. And when I went over I just happened to be wearing my Harriman jacket because I happened to be, wearing it at the time. And people started coming over to me, why can't the city do something about this? Why can't, and well, this just happened a couple weeks ago in the exact same spot, the exact same thing. I get it, and it's fair, right? Because sometimes it's not a near miss. Yeah, everyone was physically okay as far as personal injury was, but there was definitely property damage. Luckily, we had designed the safe walking route so that no child was crossing that particular exit of the school. But still, obviously, there's a safety concern. People are rushing, people are trying to get out. How do we help mitigate some of those in the situation where a light is not justified for a parking exit, right? Because that's what it was. It was the exit to the parking lot. There's no light justified there. But what can we do? What can we consider? How can we mitigate some of that? And I think that's exactly what my understanding is that this is trying to accomplish right now.
Yeah, I'm appreciative of this too, and I think educating the residents about we have an enhanced process, right? A way to look for solutions that are outside of the book. I think that's important. And I think that I don't know, maybe there's a discussion to be had around what the exact criteria are and how those things are determined. I don't necessarily know this is the time to get into that, but
I think that's the logical next step though, right, is that, okay, here's kind of these things that don't have those standards that actually can cause us problems, right? So we go outside of that, but these are the things that we should try, but then, what process do we need to go through, how to somehow quantify these near misses that there's no way to measure them with the current process, so how do we quantify that and justify which one of these is, right? Because if it's just anecdotal, somebody's upset and okay, that happened, we want to fix it. It's human error. I mean, people do make bad decisions, they aren't paying attention sometimes, but if it happens repeatedly in the same place, then, how do we quantify that? Again, that's not a conversation for here, but I think that's the next step for that group is, okay, how do we set up kind of a process for this gray area to try to use some of these things?
yeah, and the challenging thing is that it is coming up with a solution that applies for 30 minutes twice a day.
Yeah.
In a limited.
Because school's where we're gonna get the most pressure, right?
But in a
That's
lot
where
of
you
these
get the most
areas,
attention.
it's.
But that's not those
it's
aren't
not
the
the only
only
one.
places, right?
Yeah,
There's,
and it's
know.
30 minutes for that school, but the one across the street is another 30 minutes, another one.
Right,
Right, and
We have
it's,
4 of the same block.
yeah, I mean, it turns out into a couple hours 2 times a day.
right.
So now you're looking for like an.
Yeah, and then it becomes, and maybe that's part of the criteria, right, is how frequently is this area used by children, right? Like for what period timeframes, when did the first children show up for, early morning classes or breakfast before school or something like that, right? All the way through 10 minutes after the bell or something.
And I would absolutely push, I would absolutely push that entire discussion back to that committee.
Yeah.
Cause I think they're the ones, question I do have is, does that committee have a representative from the crossing guards? Or just the
Yeah,
police department?
Bethany, our.
But
I figured it was
we have-
Bethany, I was gonna say.
we don't necessarily have to have a member, but maybe a liaison with the school district. Because some of those things, like the stop sign coming out of the school, like, some of those things can be solved on the school side of things. It's not all on the city, right? I mean, they could have
Choose to do it.
somebody there put cones there that time of day. There's gotta be some
When
kind
we
of
ran into
common
issues,
solutions.
like Fort Harriman Middle had a bunch of issues a few years
Oh,
ago.
yeah.
We pulled the school district in and they, over summer break, they reconfigured their whole exit.
Right.
So, I don't know
Sometimes
if
I
you
think
wanna
it's
really
gotta
wanna
be
have a
both, right?
liaison at every meeting.
No.
But when you have an issue with the school, we can pull them in on
I mean,
that
if
one
there's
issue.
something that it's square peg round hole, maybe that's the time to pull them in.
Well, yeah, and there, so Ridgeview is a new school, right? And so we have a new development going in around it, so what seemed like a good idea 18 months ago may not be the best idea today, which may not be the best idea in 12 months after
Well,
the
especially
rest
once
of
new
these things are
development
built out,
comes in
right?
around it, yeah.
Right, so
For some
the-
reason, people's
so those
actual
evolve,
decision
right?
making doesn't follow the civil engineers.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other problem too.
Once they get there, they don't do what they're supposed to.
The other thing, and I'm satisfied that there's a offline conversation to be had around this through committees and maybe setting up some, public meetings or something like that, where we can get some input about a specific topic, that kind of a thing. The other issue then becomes, how do I explain this? How much attention do we wanna give to bad decision-making, or I would classify it as selfish decision-making by, parents who are dropping and picking up their kids off.
That's
from
what I
school.
mean, there's that human.
Really saying, I'm special, and so I don't need to follow the established
Absolutely.
And that's what I mean by
guidelines
the
for English.
civil engineers, we try to circumvent the way it's supposed to work for our convenience.
Right,
Harriman High School is a perfect example of that, and the road, I mean, we had parents dropping off on a high-speed road, and just having their kids run across the street, because the same thing in Providence, right?
Every
Down-
school's a good example.
Like, well, yeah, but
Every school, right.
Providence, they literally had kids running down to Mountain View corridor and hopping in the bed of a pickup truck. Because, like, we have video of it, of a kid hopping in the bed of a pickup truck on Mountain View corridor because they didn't wanna have to come into the neighborhood. Like, you're right, and that's where there's some, I mean, Chief will tell you a million times, there's the 3E, education, enforcement, and engineering, right? That's the time that you gotta pull out the enforcement, lever of that, in addition to the engineering. We tried to do some engineering stuff
We
there.
try to limit their opportunities to
Yeah.
make bad
You have that
decisions,
in
but
the
you can never
program.
stop them.
I totally understand,
Way
I just,
too.
Yep.
So, it's interesting, cause Fort Harriman is right on the border of my district, and Ridgeview is right on my district, so I get a lot of attention from parents in both areas here, right? And I don't mean to focus on these in violate the concerns of Providence Hall. I've had a lot of complaints, right, and other elementary and middle and high schools around the city. Is that great plans are implemented for the flow of traffic. Everybody should come this way and go through this way and exit this way, and everybody does this, it'll be more efficient overall. But
Limitations.
people go, no, I need to come from this direction, and I'm gonna turn here across 2 lanes of traffic and hold everybody up, and because I had, a point you made earlier, because I had to wait for 4 minutes, now I'm gonna jut in and cut off a whole bunch of traffic and create a more substantial problem, so I guess that would be a question to consider too,
I
is
think there's a Nobel Prize.
Whoever figures that
Yeah,
out.
Whoever
right.
figures that one,
Tried to lead a jazz game.
right?
just trying to figure out how do we, we're talking about how to augment our engineering processes, right? What can we do to augment the other 2 E's, right? The education and the enforcement processes. We don't wanna have, our peace officers spending 2-hour blocks every day, all the time, writing tickets to stupid parents, right? It's,
So a lot of times that creates a bigger problem.
right, then people are like, why are you targeting us, that kind of stuff,
Why
right?
are you blocking that area? Now you're making a bigger problem.
All the above, right? and then figure out how we can augment educational opportunities there. So my purpose in asking the council to consider this was just to say to our public and as a council, these are things that we're trying to consider. How do we solve problems that the current systems are not solving? And we're trying to come up with new and novel, creative ways, learning from other people's experiences of what we might be able to do to enhance things. So I just don't want people to think that there's a lack of concern or care, or, I mean, my children go to school, right? They're walking home from school most days. They like doing that, and freaks me out. So I share the concerns, and I just want our public to understand we are trying to find ways to make it better. And that I would encourage them to continue to communicate with us as council members, communicate with the traffic committee. You can go right on the website and do that, right? And that we continue to find ways to make it better. If it's not fixed, let's keep working on it.
Personally, I'm all about, I would love to see a 3D printed paint job on the thing that says slow and what looks like 3D as you're coming down the street.
You say that,
No, I'm dead serious.
if you go into
3D printed speed bumps.
well, they exist, so if you go to the Las Vegas airport, it works in places where people don't drive often. You come up and it looks like
a
there's
3D letter.
Yeah, it looks like you're gonna hit something like these ballers and you have to go around and slow down. There is a road in Chicago where the lines are uniform, it's on the fence, they're uniform, and all of a sudden they start getting closer together. And it gives you the sense that you are speeding, and you watch people's brakes come on. So there are some unique things you can do. If they drive it all the time, they'll figure it out pretty quickly,
Sure.
but that is something, I think, with the changing the crosswalk colors.
I'm serious about it. I think that being open, when I say novel solutions, being open to something like that where we are having an issue where it is through traffic or outside city traffic, having something like that. Yes, there's always the possibility of somebody slamming on their brakes and causing a rear end, which is what I'm getting right here. But I'm open to it. That's just all I'm saying.
I think there was a supplement to the MUTCD some months back on some of these unique things. We could probably look at it, but it talked about different ways to slow traffic, and they're allowing some deviations from their standard painting just to.
Some of those some of those supplements are state specific, so we'd have to look at that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Cause
if
Utah has
this-
its own section.
Oregon had adopted some unique paint structures, because the first thing was, well, it's gotta be in the MUTCD, and, oh, yes, they gave us this option. So we can look and see, again, those are fairly inexpensive, the bollards are about $400 each. You can get them for less, but by the time you put them in. So you can start, generally what I would say is you'd start with one, and if it doesn't improve, you can always pull a bollard out, move to the median, do something different. There's some less expensive ways to try and start addressing concerns quickly.
What if it's a matter of communication to public? Absolutely, let's communicate to public that, yeah, just a reminder, we have this committee and this is how you submit, ideas and places you want us to look at, for sure.
Maybe
I mean, we'll never make everyone happy all the time, because some people want some silly things sometimes.
Yeah, that's the
But-
thing is pushing
But
in
there,
school.
but yeah, it's not just, does it fit into our criteria or not, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it, of course, we'll consider everything.
Particularly right before the school year starts, when they have all those parent, get to know you days, having those available for the school, like pamphlets or stuff that we can give to them. Alright, so I think we've given some direction, that's the end of our agenda, is there any further items we need to discuss on that one? Okay, I will accept the motion to adjourn our work meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Alright, we will go straight into our community meeting that we had noticed for 6:30, so if we can move in there quickly, I'd appreciate that. Second place.